The member for Hamilton Mountain.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move second reading of Bill 110 to amend the Ombudsman Act with respect to the Children's Aid Societies.
Ms. Taylor has moved second reading of Bill 110, an act to amend the Ombudsman Act with respect to Children's Aid Societies. First, you understand in Order 98, the member has 12 minutes for her presentation. Ms. Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That is a good sign. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It gives me great pleasure to rise in the House today to start second reading of debate of this act to amend the Ombudsman Act with respect to the Children's Aid Society, my first private member's bill. When I was first elected last October, I knew this was an issue I wanted to bring forward, an issue that needed to be brought forward. Ontario's 47 Children's Aid Society perform a critical role in our province. Through the Child and Family Services Act, they are charged with the responsibility to ensure the well-being and safety of our children. Under that Act, they must investigate allegations that children may be in need of protection. They must provide protection where necessary, and they must provide guidance, counseling, and other services. They must provide care. They work with exceptionally vulnerable children and families. Mr. Speaker, to fulfill their mandate, Children's Aid Societies are given extraordinary powers to remove children from the family home, put them in foster care, or put them up for adoption. The consequences of an intervention by a Children's Aid Society can be life-changing for the children and for their families. There can be no doubt of the importance of the role played by those working in the child welfare, and there can be no doubt about the critical nature of their work. It is an exceptionally difficult job, and there are many dedicated professionals working within the system. But unfortunately, sometimes mistakes are made. And when they are, the consequences are devastating. Devastating for the child and devastating for their families. And on top of the heartache and the turmoil that they are experiencing, they are faced with processes and procedures that they find impossible to navigate. For years, I have heard stories from people who felt that they had nowhere to turn if they had a concern about their Children's Aid Society. And since being elected, particularly in my role as the NDP critic for Children and Youth Services, I have continued to hear many similar stories from all across Ontario. I would be surprised if there were members in this House who have not heard from their constituents whose lives have been turned upside down by a Children's Aid Society, and they feel absolutely powerless to do anything about it. Some of these folks are here with us today in the gallery, and they are here to listen to the debate in hope that finally, after years of speaking out, that they will see some action. The welfare of our children is one of the most important things our government can do, and often drastic steps have to be taken. There can be very few life events as emotionally disturbing as a child being removed from the family. Devastating for the child and devastating for their family. Yes, sometimes it has to be done. Sometimes that drastic step has to be taken. Sometimes it's the only option to ensure protection for a child. But when it happens, it's absolutely critical that we get it right. Our system and processes need to be above reproach. We must be sure we are doing everything right to be fair to the child and to their family. We must ensure that we know the full story. Decisions must be absent of any bias, and we must make sure that the child is placed appropriately and safely in a new home. Given the importance and the consequences of any actions, it seems quite frankly unbelievable that we do not have a mechanism for fully independent oversight of the agencies charged with the most responsibility work on behalf of the government. We must extend the Ombudsman's mandate so that he can perform independent, fair-minded, unbiased investigations into complaints. The Ombudsman himself has repeatedly called for his mandate to be extended to include the Children's Aid Society. Here's one of the quotes from him from February of last year. "I can't think of any area more ripe for oversight than child welfare. Children die and no one takes responsibility. No one answers the important questions. It's just so sad." End of quote. Undoubtedly, some will say that there is already oversight of the Children's Aid Society. They will cite the family courts, they will cite the Auditor General, and they will undoubtedly cite the Child and Family Services Review Board. In the past, they have even mentioned the Office of the Chief Coroner and the Pediatric Death Review Committee. Let's look at these. Obviously, the Chief Coroner and the Pediatric Death Review Committee carry out an essential, vital, highly skilled function. But they come in after there has been a death, once the ultimate damage is done. They can most certainly help us understand what went wrong, but that is a small comfort to the families who have perhaps been crying out for months or even years. The role of the Auditor General is to look at the money. Again, an important function, but the mandate doesn't extend to the type of issues that we're dealing with. I think most people will appreciate that fighting things out in family court is not the most desirable avenue to resolve issues. It is an adversarial venue, and it's very costly, and it can take forever for a case to move through the system. We hear of court dates being cancelled at the very last minute. We hear of last-minute scheduling of courts. To say that the families are feeling outgunned by the Children's Aid Society's lawyers is an understatement. That leaves us with the Child and Family Services Review Board, a body that was set up supposedly to address some of the key issues families are dealing with. Unfortunately, many families feel from their own dealings with the board that their concerns were not addressed. Mr. Speaker, the success of our child welfare system is to large extent dependent on the public's confidence in the system, and that confidence has been eroded for many. That is a problem that we need to correct, and it was hoped by the establishment of the CFSRB would help in that regard. But that's not what I'm hearing in respect to the CFSRB. The reality is that the CFSRB has too narrow a scope to deal with many of the problems. They can't deal with anything that's before the court or anything that's already been decided by the courts. They may only look at procedural matters, and they can't investigate allegations into abuse or neglect. Any of those seeking or receiving Children's Aid Society services can only register a complaint, meaning that the grandparents or any other concerned family members are excluded from this process. As a measure of limited scope for the CFSRB, it is worth noting that they have made only 350 decisions in the past 6 years. Get your pencils out. Meanwhile, the Ombudsman, even though he has no authority to investigate, received 429 complaints in 2008-2009, 296 in 2009-2010, 386 in 2010-2011, and 491 in 2011-2012. That's a total of over 1,600 complaints about the Children's Aid Society in 4 years. It's clear that whatever mechanisms are in place, there is a desperate need for the Ombudsman. By giving the Ombudsman the capacity to oversee the Children's Aid Society, we will get the broad general authority and respect that comes with that office. We get skilled investigators and achieve an ability to receive analysis of the problems. Those benefits are not gone unnoticed by other jurisdictions all across Canada. BC, Alberta, Yukon, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, Quebec, New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, Newfoundland and Labrador have all recognized the wisdom of giving their Ombudsman the responsibility to oversee the child protection services. Yes, it's true that Ontario is the only province that uses the third party to deliver those services. But in doing so, it does not relinquish its responsibility. Ontario's Children's Aid Societies act on behalf of the government. They are governed by the Child and Family Services Act, and they are funded to a tune of $1.5 billion of the Ontario government money. It's time that Ontario caught up with the rest of the country. Mr. Speaker, 3 weeks ago, all parties in this House supported the member for Windsor West private member's bill to establish Child and Youth in Care Day. During debate on that bill, everyone, including the Minister of Children and Youth Services, said we needed to do more. That message was heard loud and clear across this House, and this is our opportunity to do more. The Ombudsman can deal directly with some critical issues with respect to the Children's Aid Society, and in doing so, he can help us identify and better understand recurring problems in the system. I urge all members to support this bill and help us move towards a better, more just child welfare system in Ontario. Mr. Speaker, we have members here with us in the House today that have been fighting this battle for many years. I congratulate them on everything that they do. They've been rallying Queen's Park. They've been rallying all of their MPPs for years. I mean, there's petitions. There's everything that's going on. These families can't take anymore. They don't know where else to turn. Mr. Speaker, I'm blessed to be able to stand here today in support of these families, and I'm praying with everything that I got inside of me that today this House is going to support this bill, and we are going to get it to committee, and we are going to enact it into law, because this is necessary. This isn't a joke. This is something that has to be done. So, thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Further debate, the member for Ottawa-Orleans.
Well, thank you, Speaker, and I'm pleased to speak to Ms. Taylor's bill, the member for Hamilton Mountain, Bill 110, an act to amend the Ombudsman Act with respect to the Children's Aid Societies. It would amend the Ombudsman's Act, increasing the power of the Ombudsman to investigate Ontario's Children's Aid Societies. Ontario funds and monitors 47 Children's Aid Societies as part of our commitment to support the well-being and protection of children, and we believe in the important work done by Children's Aid Societies and the crucial role they play in our communities. I truly commend any act which would seek to improve the accountability of any organization when they are found lacking, specifically one which services and cares for the young and vulnerable members of our communities. It is my observation, however, that the Children's Aid Societies have taken significant action over the last few years to ensure the accountability of these societies and the protection of children and youth they serve. The steps we have taken are effective. Steps they have taken are effective. The mechanisms in place are mechanisms that Ontarians can have confidence in, that we're not lacking in accountability. When I was first elected to this legislature in 2003, I remember we heard a lot about the Children's Aid Societies, about accountability and transparency and the issues faced by the children under their care. The experience in Ottawa-Orleans, the system needed help then, needed change, and Children's Aid Societies and the government stepped up to this challenge. Well, Mr. Speaker, in the years since my first being at this legislature, I've heard less and less problems with the Children's Aid Societies. I truly believe that they and we must be doing some of the right things. When I look at the changes that have been implemented, strengthened protections and improved resources and mechanisms for oversight that have been put in place, I know that we are on the right track. Already we have made so much progress in working with the Children's Aid Societies, coming up with the mechanisms to better protect vulnerable youth, children and youth. We have implemented rigorous background checks for those proposing to care for a child receiving Children's Aid Society services. These organizations have access to enhanced tools to assess risk to a child's safety and match their response to needs of the child and family. Through alternate dispute resolution, we have promoted opportunities to resolve more child protection cases outside the courtroom. These changes represent real progress which Ontarians can be proud of and have confidence in. In every other province in Canada, child protection is operated directly by government. In Ontario, we have chosen to have a different model and I can proudly say that in this case we are unique. We are unique in that our CASs are community-based, non-profit organizations with independent boards, community oversight, and community representatives that are on those boards. And the model of the community-based involvement has so many benefits. For example, when the community is involved in the governance of the society, they are more engaged and invested in the outcomes of families and children receiving services from a children's aid society. Perhaps most importantly, when children's aid societies are able to exercise innovation at the local level, it allows them to be sensitive and responsible to the local context while delivering services in compliance with ministry standards. This balanced approach means that our children's aid societies are accountable not only to the government, but to the communities they serve. And Mr. Speaker, over the years our government has taken important steps to further ensure that accountability are our children's aid societies. We've required that all children's aid societies have clear, transparent and consistent complaint review procedures. We've established the Independent Provincial Advocate for Children and Youth, which partners with children and youth and provides an independent voice for them to bring issues forward. We have increased the mandate and powers of the Child and Family Services Review Board to independently review complaints related to children's aid societies and decisions of children's aid societies and adoption licensees. And I would like to take a moment to speak about the Child and Family Service Review Board, which operates at arm's length from government. The CSRB is part of the Social Justice Tribunals cluster that was formally designated on January 19, 2011, and as I mentioned, has the power to review complaints related to children's aid societies. Well, Mr. Speaker, the Ombudsman is in fact able to investigate complaints about the Child and Family Services Review Board and report and issue recommendations arising from such a review. So while not a direct oversight, the Ombudsman is still an important piece in this process. So it seemed to me that through the CSRB and the Children's Aid Societies are already accountable to the Ombudsman. And while we absolutely remain committed to continue to work closely with the Ombudsman to improve child protective services, I simply do not see a need here to fix something that is not broken nor to duplicate an existing mechanism. Mr. Speaker, I think what I'm trying to say can be summarized in a quote which I'll finish off with. This was written by Mary Rutledge, the Executive Director of Family, Child and Youth Services of Muskoka, and someone with first-hand knowledge and experience with the Children's Aid Society. It is true that the Ombudsman does not have direct oversight, but that does not mean that they do not have input and authority. The Minister of Child and Youth Services is accountable to the Ombudsman through government processes for the system accountability. A local agency such as Family, Youth and Child Services of Muskoka is held to account for any complaint. The province chose not to stop at that level and put in place an independent panel. The Child and Family Services Review Board is fully mandated under the Child and Family Services Act and operates independent of government to hear and resolve complaints brought to it relating to child protection. With that, I would like to conclude my comments today on Bill 110. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. For the debate, the member for Burlington.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to commend the member from Hamilton Mountain for introducing Bill 110, which would give the Ontario Ombudsman the authority to investigate and report on complaints to the province's children's aid societies. The Ombudsman himself has been calling for this authority for some time. He says quite correctly that the province's children's aid societies are going through a difficult period of structural revision and financial rationalization. The Ombudsman believes that his office is best equipped to investigate complaints against the Children's Aid Society because he will be able to identify systemic problems that may be at the root of some of the complaints. This is a good reason. Right now, complaints against the Children's Aid Society are dealt with by applying to the Child and Family Services Review Board. This is a tribunal that is part of the recently formed Social Justice Tribunals Ontario, which groups together or clusters several dispute resolution bodies. According to their annual statement, and I quote, "Clustering will ensure the most efficient use of resources, and while that is important in and of itself, efficiency is also a key component of access to justice, since inefficient use of resources means that members of the public who seek to access the tribunals may be delayed or denied," unquote. The same report tells us that during 2010-2011, the Children and Family Services Review Board received 246 applications to have a complaint about Children's Aid Society decisions reviewed by the board. In the same year, just 17 cases were heard, and in 11 of those, orders were made in favor of the applicant. So there was a problem with the original Children's Aid Society decision in well over 50% of the cases reviewed. Since there were only 17 cases heard in 2010-2011, there were some 229 open cases of kids improperly placed or unfairly removed from their families that have complaints about their current situation. That's 229 cases that were waiting to be heard. Mr. Speaker, we all know kids grow up fast. We also know that the parent-child relationship is dynamic and precious. It is central to our quality of life. Kids and parents can't afford to wait for the adjudicative process to get them there. It would appear that clustering is not working. The Ombudsman's office will provide a process that is efficient, objective, and accountable to the public. For these reasons, I support Bill 110. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Further debate, the member for Nickel Belt.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I will try to put things in a little bit of perspective. We've heard from the member from Hamilton Mountain as to how the system presently works and what the system tries to do. There are lots of very good people, lots of social workers with good hearts and good intentions that work within the system and that really try to help. And at the end of all this, Mr. Speaker, we are human beings. And it doesn't matter how hard we try, how good intention we are, how big our hearts are, we all make mistakes. We all make mistakes because we are human beings. If you find yourself working for the Children's Aid Society and all of those good intentioned social workers and everybody else who work this, who love children and want them to grow up to be all that they can be, they are human beings. And sometimes they get it wrong. When they get it wrong, the families involved try to get closure. They try to see what went wrong, what happened. And the mechanism in place for them to do this are cumbersome, does not meet their expectations, does not meet their needs, and it fails them. We have with us in the gallery today people that came down from Nickel Belt. Not very often, Mr. Speaker, people come down from Nickel Belt. It is a long ride. It is a long and expensive ride. But right now, Neil Haskett, Marjorie Baudry, Liliane Lalonde, Eve Thunderbird, and Tammy McIntyre, they came down. They came down because they wanted to hear us. They wanted to hear what people had to say about this, because they are part of the hundreds of Ontarians throughout our province, throughout the geography, who wants ombudsman oversight. They want somebody who's on their side. They want an equal playing field so that we can get to the bottom of the questions that face them, their family, and their children. And they look to our ombudsman. The Ombudsman's office has the skills to do investigation. They know how to ask questions. They know how to get to the bottom of things. It could very well be that what because it's Mr. Marin, and he ends up saying, is exactly what has been told to them, but they will hear it from a voice that they trust, that have their best interest. It could very well be that we also discovered that there are some systemic issues, that it doesn't matter how hard the people at the local level try to identify them and change them, that they are systemic. And only an office like the Ombudsman's office, who looks at complaints throughout our province, only his office will be able to bring meaningful changes to this. Why is it that when we get elected and when we read the platforms of the three different parties, we all talk about the need for transparency. We all talk about the needs for accountability. How do we make our democracy and how do we make our government stronger? A sure key to get there is transparency, accountability mechanism. This is how you grow. This is how you get excellence out of the programs and services that we have. To bring Ombudsman oversight to Children's Aid has nothing to do with, it's not because the system, the Children's Aid Society system is broken. It's not because they haven't done some good work. I could rhyme off hundreds of times where the Children's Aid Society has done some excellent work and that children were helped because of what happened. And they ended up growing up to use their full potential because the Children's Aid Society was there. I'm not casting a spell that says everything they do is wrong. No, not at all, not at all. We need them. They do the work that they're mandated to do. And they do this to the best of their ability. And like every other human being, including the 107 MPPs in this chamber, they are human, and sometimes human make mistakes. And when this happens, then you find out being a family in a very, very vulnerable position. Here you are, telling the people who have a say over whether your child's going to be with you or not. You are trying to exercise your right in a position that puts you at such a disadvantage that the chances of winning are really skewed, Mr. Speaker. They are really skewed. They want an independent third party. The member from Hamilton Mountain has done her homework, Mr. Speaker. She had shared with us the hundreds of complaints that the Ombudsman receives every year. And what does he say to those parents? He tells them, I'm sorry, I don't have oversight of the Children's Aid. This is not what parents want to hear. The Ombudsman never asked for extra money. He never asked for anything. He asked for oversight so that he can help those parents. I know that there are other members of my caucus who wants to speak on this issue, so I will wrap up. But I would ask the people to really think about the situation where it's easy to say we need accountability, we want our programs and services to be stronger and better and meet the expectations of the people of Ontario. And we have an opportunity to do that today by bringing Ombudsman oversight to the Children's Aid Society. And my time is up. My good friend from Hamilton East Stony Creek has made sure that I heard him. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. For the debate, the member for Scarborough Agent Court.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to be able to give an opportunity to speak about this proposed Bill 110. And I want to first, with my remark, Mr. Speaker, to thank the Minister of Children and Youth Services for his leadership role in his very complex, challenging ministry and supporting children and youth across the province. So the Minister is doing a great job, and I want to recognize him in the House, Mr. Speaker. The proposed Bill 110, as it said, it's amended Ombudsman Act with respect to Children's Aid Society. Let me go through some aspect of this particular legislation, Mr. Speaker, about what's currently happening in Ontario. My colleague from Ottawa, Orleans, spoke a little bit about it, but I want to reinforce the message here is the fact that in Ontario, the children protection system is completely different from other provinces. It is important to note that the CAS in Ontario are accountable not only to the government, but also communities they serve. Ontario's CAS are structurally designed differently than any other provinces in Canada, Mr. Speaker. The Ontario CAS are independent legal entities. They are non-profit, community-based corporation with volunteer boards of directors or Indian bands operating under the Indian Act. In contrast, as my colleague from Ottawa, Orlean, said, the CAS across other part of the province, other part of outside Ontario, are directly operated out of ministry or government department. Hence, the ombudsmen are involved to oversee the CAS activities, Mr. Speaker. Our government has taken a number of steps to ensure the accountability. We all agree accountability is an important piece of agency like the Children's Aid Society. But I want to also stress a couple other mechanisms the government has enacted. We have established the Independent Provincial Advocate for Children and Youth, which provides an independent voice for children and youth by partnering with them to bring issues forward. The other piece, Mr. Speaker, we also have increased the mandate and the powers of the Children and Family Services Review Board to independently review complaints related to Children's Aid Society and decision of Children's Aid Societies and adoption licensees. We all know, Mr. Speaker, the Ombudsman may investigate. Currently, the Ombudsman may investigate complaints about the Child and Family Services Review Board and report and issue recommendations arise from such a review. So, Mr. Speaker, right now the Ombudsman in Ontario already have some role to play in reviewing CAS. Furthermore, Mr. Speaker, when all else fails, there's a family court. It is available to any individuals and family. On top of that, Mr. Speaker, in Ontario we have 12 other financial and administrative mechanisms to oversee the CAS. These mechanisms ensure some checks and balances of the CAS. Absolutely correct when the member from Hamilton Mountain talk about the accountability, ensuring protection of every young person in Ontario. But I want to make sure, Mr. Speaker, if we go into the route of creating another layer of oversight, that we need to ask through the committee to have more conversation about this particular bill. Because I am particularly sensitive, Mr. Speaker, coming from my previous roots, is the fact that we create another layer on top of what's already I spoke about in terms of cost. I know the member from Nickel Bell talked about that we know additional costs, but let's not forget this in this House that I remember as a young nurse that how many Ombudsman's office have been closed across Ontario. Okay, so I remember those days. Okay, so I'm particularly concerned that if we're going to create another layer of oversight, that the operation piece is within the budget of the government, but more importantly, is it really going to help young people, but protecting young people, and another independent lenses to investigate, to review, and provide very solid recommendation, Mr. Speaker. So with regard to this particular bill, Mr. Speaker, I think that there are merits. There's certainly merit in terms of making sure that this particular bill go to a committee to have another review and bringing in witnesses to the committee and how to improve. Because I think all of us receive a copy and the letter from the member from Hamilton Mountains, and I'd like to have more wordings, because I think if we're going to create this layer called Ombudsman oversight of the CAS, I want a little bit more parameters, more definitions in terms of timeline, in terms of investigations, and more importantly, I want to hear from the experts out there, from the academic, okay? And most importantly, Mr. Speaker, we need to make sure this new layer of review by the Ombudsman that's been proposed by my colleague from Hamilton Mountain, that this will not become another bureaucratic layers to look at CAS, because we already have a number of them, Mr. Speaker. So I thank you, the member from Hamilton Mountain, to bring this forward. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. For the debate, the member for Lennox, Addington.
Lanark, Frontenac, Lennox, and Addington. Thank you, Speaker.
Thank you.
That's a biggie.
It's my pleasure to speak to Bill 110 today, Speaker. And as I said in the House yesterday, with regards to Government Bill 75, Good public policy requires three foundational principles: oversight, recourse, and accountability. As legislators, we don't have oversight over all aspects of the administration of government. The work of many administrative bodies are exempt. The Children's Aid Society is one of those. And history has taught us that the need for oversight is imperative and that the Ombudsman is one means to achieve that end. I'd like to read a little bit from the Ontario Royal Commission's inquiry into civil rights in discussing the origin of the Ombudsman, which developed in Sweden over 300 years ago. It states, as royal power declined and representative democracy developed, Parliament felt the need of an official with duties similar to those of the Ombudsman to scrutinize the actions of administrative officials on behalf of and to report to the legislative body. The Swedes recognized that each official engaged in the administration of the affairs of government is largely answerable only to the law or their interpretation of it and to their own conscience rather than to a higher official. This can be problematic. Injustices deserve correction, and this is difficult when, to quote later from the report, there are wide areas of government into which the elected member of the legislature has no power to inquire. We refer to the administrative councils of local governments and municipal bodies, such as boards and commissions. We can further extrapolate to include bodies such as the Children's Aid Society, which do not allow oversight from elected officials. I would not for a moment suggest that the Ombudsman is a complete answer to the problems of the administration of justice. He's just one tool, quite a good one, I think, but just one, and mankind needs many tools in this technological age. Those are quotes from the Royal Commission in Ontario. Speaker, an Ombudsman is not the be-all and end-all solution to the problems with the Children's Aid Societies, but it does provide greater oversight and accountability. The existing Act does provide a little bit, but as a legislator, I'd like to share my experience in one or two cases. And I would refer the members in this House to look at the Child and Family Services Act, Section 103. A child in care has a right to speak in private and receive visits from a member of the Legislative Assembly of Ontario or of the Parliament of Canada. I don't know how many members have actually tried to exercise that right. I have. And I have been stonewalled by some Children's Aid Societies who have actually gone out and prevented me from exercising my right or that child in care. There are people that I've seen tragedies, such as Andrew Skinner and his wife Lindsay, who went through the turmoil of a Children's Aid Society case, I believe unfairly and unjustly, and they had no remedy. And our public policy can never be justified if it doesn't provide remedies to the tragedies it creates. Andrew and Lindsay spent over $300,000 trying to find a remedy. They are still deeply in debt, and there still is no recourse. I encourage all members of this House to support this bill. Thank you.
Thank you. Further debate, the member for Trinity Spadina.
Thank you, Speaker. I'm happy to rise to support Bill 110, a bill presented by my colleague from Hamilton Mountain. Before I start, I just want to say how much I appreciated the remarks made from the member from Lanark, Frontenac, Lennox, Addington. I thought they were eminently reasonable, as the other members who have spoken on the bill as well. I spoke to Bill 120, introduced by the member from Peterborough, and I said about that bill that he presented a very strong case for why we needed a law that protects people's money in our RSSPs and related retirement savings from credit seizure. And he made a case arguing that 6 other provinces in Canada are doing it, and most states in America were doing it. And I thought it was a reasonable, good case. And I felt his government should be doing it, because it doesn't cost a dime, even. Then I heard the member from Hamilton Mountain do a similarly good presentation in defense of Bill 110. And it was coherent, it was compelling, it was reasonable, practical, sensible, and unideological. What more do you want by way of a defense of a particular bill? Then I listened to 2 members from Ottawa, Orleans, and the member from Scarborough Agincourt. And these are arguments that I've heard before on a similar bill that was presented in the past. And these are arguments that the former minister made in this House on this bill, and I find them indefensible. I really do. The member from Ottawa Orleans says that we have community oversight. No, we don't. That we have a provincial advocate. Yes, we do. But doesn't have the investigative powers that an ombudsman has. And we like the provincial advocate, but doesn't do the job of what an ombudsman could do by way of an investigation around problems. And the member from Ottawa Orleans argues the system is not broken. We're not saying the system is broken. We're saying that when people have a problem and they have no one to turn to, where do you go? We're saying the ombudsman is the only person you can go to. We're not saying the system is broken. We're not attacking children's aid societies. We're saying when there is a problem that a young person faces or a family faces with children's aid, where do you go? The member from Scarborough Agincourt says this would be another layer. It's the same argument the previous Minister Broughton made around this issue. It's not a layer. It is a person you go to when you want an independent problem to be investigated, when you want a strong advocate, when you want a fair-minded person to investigate a problem, you go to the Ombudsman. Most of the other provinces in Canada do that.
Already.
Which is the case the member from Peterborough was making around his bill. If most other provinces in Canada are sensible and reasonable enough to say we need ombudsman oversight, why are you not doing it? My fear is that you're just too afraid. You're too afraid of negative publicity that could come from such an investigation. And rather than your Premier leading on this, saying, we want problems to emerge, we want to see what the problems are, systemic or individual, because we want to solve them. Rather than having a Premier and a Minister who say that, they make all these senseless arguments against it that make you, all Liberals, make all of you look so bad, it's pitiful.
Thank you. Further debate? The member for Durham.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I just want to first start by acknowledging the member from Hamilton Mountain, and for the right reasons, for the right time. I think it's an item that's been here a couple of times before in different formats. And I like to think that the title of the bill could almost be copied from Bill 115, putting children first. In fact, Bill 115 put them last, basically. So I mean, this would be a true name for this, is putting children first. And I think the member from Nickel Belt also, I said she said that we're all humans and we all make mistakes. And I think this is when you put children first, and they say things that perhaps sometimes got the whole system started. They might accuse somebody of something else. And there needs to be a fair, independent, capable way of resolving these disputes fairly. And that I think has been explained by most speakers, that the ombudsperson is a trusted individual. In the case of the current one, Monsieur Moran, certainly in the media more frequently than some of them. We'll leave it at that. But I think as being an advocate type, the Ombudsman has to be fair in their dealing and reviews of cases under Children's Aid. Now, I would say I meet with Children's Aid. Now, in our case, I don't blame the Children's Aid specifically in their case. I think it's the member from Burlington said that there's some inefficiencies in the system, and I think she said that there were 17 cases heard in 2010, 2011, and yet there's over 229 cases that are children where this is being challenged, the decisions made by somebody being challenged but not being heard. So they perhaps in the wrong case of or placement of care. And I met recently with the New Heights Youth Center in my riding, and these are children who under some section are in sort of open custody. They're 16, 17-year-olds, and they're in this youth center under the direction of being paid for on a per diem basis by the Children's Aid, by taxpayers' money. And I've had complaints of, you know, drugs and stuff like that being around and maybe not enough supervision. But when I'm meeting with these people and the neighbors who are affected by this, they tell me that they don't have enough money on the per diem that's being paid to adequately supervise and oversight and help mentoring these young children into a new point in life. So this is often we hear from the government, and with all due respect, I see a couple of ministers here, that they're saying there's not enough money in the system to do the job properly. So I don't want to put this Children's Aid at blame, but I only say that having the Ombudsman come in or the Auditor General coming in and saying there's inappropriate use of money, resources, staff, whatever, is a good thing. And I know my Children's Aid is in a deficit where they've laid off half the resource people that are really, believe myself that they're trying to help children. So I don't fault. It's the system needs the help. It needs the commentary from these independent officers of the legislature, like the Ombudsman or the Auditor General, to come in and say, there's a problem here, here's some recommendations. That goes to the estimates or the review of Public Accounts Committee, with many of my peers are on those committees, and they can take action and bring some results. And at the end of the day, helping children. That's really what this is about. I don't think it's picking wars or saying, okay, all Children's Aid are bad and all that stuff. That's not the case at all. I think the arguments been made have been made very fairly here, and I think the member from Burlington spoke in such a short term but explained it very well. There's inefficiencies in the system, and the children are disadvantaged because of those inefficiencies. Wait lists, etc. Now, I've seen other CASs on the news with problems, and the disputes resolution system just does not seem to be working. Then you even appeal. I tell them to write to the Ombudsman. Myself, on occasion, I find that there's no satisfactory response from an indifferent minister. I sort of give the Ombudsman a bit of a poke. And but at the end of the day, I think everyone here wants to make sure that children are first, and that would be a good name for this bill. I just offer that as a recommendation. Putting children first. That's what this is about, and I think that's what I hear being said in the legislature today. And I think children with a comfortable, supportive environment, preferably their home, is what is needed for their futures and for our collective futures as a province. Thank you.
Thank you. The member for Hamilton Mountain, you have 2 minutes to reply.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to thank the members for Ottawa North, or Ottawa Orleans, Burlington, Nickel Belt, Scarborough, Agincourt, Lennox, Addington, Trinity, Spadina, and Durham. I would also like to recognize and thank the Minister of Children and Youth Services for being here and listening to this debate today. I commend you for that. Thank you for being here. This is a bill that, like I said, has been asked for many years. Families are in need, and you know, I've heard there's other systems in place, and yes, we know there's other systems in place, but there isn't enough of an oversight system to deal with all of the missing loophole pieces, and that's where we need to look. How do we fill in those gaps? I mean, this isn't a new story. I've met with Ontario Children's Aid Societies. I've met with the provincial advocate. I've talked to the Ombudsman. We all know that the system needs to be looked at. So let's just let the Ombudsman come in, take the roof off, have a look inside, let's build a new roof. I agree, we don't need layers on top of layers on top of layers, because that's only holding out the court systems longer. It's keeping the children in limbo longer. That's not the purpose of this. This is to make a system that works for everybody, for the children, for the families. Let's get it right. Let's figure out how we can put families back together again, instead of sometimes, unfortunately, pulling them apart where it's not necessary. These are the things that we need to look at. This is what I'm looking at the Ombudsman for. I hope that you support this bill today. I know many people right across this entire province are looking to us for this today. Thank you.
Ms. Taylor has moved second reading of Bill 110. Is it the pleasure of the House that the motion carry? Carried.
Second reading of the bill, please the next clerk will read it up.
Ms. Taylor.
I move it to Justice Policy. I was for Justice Policy.
Can't hear her this far. Okay. It is requested the bill be referred to Justice Policy. Agreed? Agreed. So referred. Orders of the day, the Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Speaker, and I move adjournment of the House.
The Minister of Education has moved adjournment of the House. Agreed? This House stand adjourned until Monday, October 15, 10:30 a.m.